Lars and Elsa stayed out of sight as they made their way to the cobblestone inn where they stayed overnight, waiting hopefully for Hans to return safely with Anna and Kristoff. Hope quickly faded as time passed and the sun began to rise. Elsa's eyes shot open and her head sprang up from the bedside table she'd accidentally fallen asleep at. Lars had shaken her awake. "How long was I asleep?" she asked. "Not long," Lars responded. "I asked Agatha to steep us some tea, and by the time I came back, you were sleeping." Elsa looked out the inn's window at the street below that was slowly filling with townsfolk getting ready to start their day. "It'll be okay, Elsa," Lars said. "I hope you don't mind that I dropped your royal title. I'd rather no one know who you are while we're trying to stay hidden." Elsa nodded. "I understand, and I'm sorry to be meeting under these circumstances. Hans speaks quite highly of you." Lars smiled. "You're the only family he's ever really mentioned while living in Arendelle," Elsa said as she sat in the chair she'd fallen asleep in. "Living?" Lars questioned. "That's an interesting way to refer to your prisoner. That's what my little brother was, right?" Elsa wasn't sure how to answer at first, but after pondering the question, "Yeah, he was. That's how it all started, at least." Elsa was no longer looking at Lars. She seemed to be looking past him at nothing as she gathered her thoughts out loud. "When Hans first showed up in the castle again, I didn't know what we should do with him. I heard what he had to say and then had him placed in a guarded room." She looked at Lars. "Do you know, for the first 2 weeks, I was sure that he would try everything to escape. He never did, though. I saw that the Hans we all knew wasn't the only Hans that existed. Underneath the surface, shaped in the Southern Isles, I knew there was more to him. So we helped him find it. We all did. Olaf, Commander Reynolds, Anders, Ingrid, and I might have helped too." Lars chuckled. "I think you should be giving yourself more credit than you are. The Hans I saw when reunited with him the other night was the little brother that I knew before the rest of our family got their sinister grip on him. It's something I thought I would never see again, especially after the Duke hired him to steal from your kingdom." Lars sat at the foot of the bed across the room. "The kingdom of Arendelle has been good for my brother, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." Elsa and Lars could feel their spirits lifting as they reminisced about their younger siblings, but eventually their minds wandered back to their current situation. "Hans, Anna, Kristoff, I hope you're okay," Elsa thought as she stared into the streets of Wesselton again. The morning soon shifted into afternoon, and Lars and Elsa had both fallen asleep without realizing it. They were woken by a knock at the door. They looked at each other, wondering who it might be, when they heard Agatha call out, "Hey, you two! There's something going on in the town square that I think you'll want to see." Lars couldn't shake the sad tone he detected in Agatha's voice. The Queen of Arendelle picked up the tattered cloak she had used to sneak away from the manor and drew the hood over her face as they left Hans' room. They made their way out into the streets. The crowd flowed in a single direction toward the town square, just as Agatha said. The pair kept their heads down and blended in with the crowd as they ventured toward a sea of people who had all gathered around a large wooden platform. "Oh no," Elsa thought as she looked up and saw the Duke standing on the platform, preparing to give a speech to the people of Wesselton.
"People of this fair city,"
he bellowed with false pride.
"as you know, I have protected Wesselton from those who would have tried to cause this dukedom harm, and have always pledged myself to help you all become—"
He hesitated as he thought of what to say.
"to help you become better."
The Duke paused, expecting applause, but by that point the crowd had all but silenced itself. He cleared his throat before continuing his speech.
"And to prove that I will always protect you, I bring you this."
The crowd gasped as 2 soldiers stepped forward, dragging Kristoff across the wooden platform.
"Kristoff,"
Elsa whispered.
"what did they do to him?"
She asked Lars. Kristoff's face was swollen and bruised. He was unconscious as he lay on the platform. Elsa began to step forward, but was stopped by Lars, who placed his arm in front of her. "We should wait," Lars said. "Assess the situation." As the crowd became quiet again, the Duke continued.
"This vile criminal was found lurking through my castle. He attacked and nearly killed one of my men, and because of that, we have chosen to make an example out of him."
"An example?" Elsa wondered.
"We want any of our neighboring lands and enemies to know that anyone who plans malfeasance in Wesselton will be punished to the fullest extent."
The Duke had a notable smirk on his face.
I have decided, with the help of my personal counsel, that this man shall be executed.
Lars and Elsa looked at each other in horror as the crowd grew rambunctious. The Duke of Wesselton put his hand up to silence the crowd before he continued.
However,
He paused as anticipation built.
we had another prisoner step forward and offer himself instead.
At that moment, 2 guards emerged from the crowd walking a chained man up the stairs of the wooden platform.
For those who don't recognize him, this is the disgraced Prince of the Southern Isles, Prince Hans Westergaard.
No, Lars said. He saw his brother standing before the Duke with his arms and legs in shackles. The Duke turned to Hans.
Kneel.
He commanded. Slowly, Hans dropped to his knees as he looked over at Kristoff, who was still passed out.
I'm sorry, my friend,
he said quietly.
They wouldn't have done this to you if I hadn't tried to break you out.
The young prince slowly turned his head to the Duke.
Let's get on with it then.
The Duke smiled down at Hans.
Oh, we will.
He turned his attention back to the crowd.
Prince Hans was also caught sneaking around my manor, and after some questioning, we determined that he and this scoundrel,
the Duke gestured to Kristoff,
have been working together. This is a blatant attack from the Southern Isles, just like when they attacked our allies in Arendelle.
The crowd filled with scattered yelling and angry gestures aimed at Hans.
The prince has offered himself in place of his mercenary,
the Duke of Wesselton said, causing the crowd to fall silent again.
And I have decided to honor this proposition.
He turned to Hans and lowered his voice so that he could only be heard by the people on the platform.
It's finally time to be rid of you, boy. But don't worry, you'll have your final words. You are a prince, after all.
The Duke ambled over to a large wooden chair at the edge of the execution platform. As he sat down, a hooded man with a large 2-headed axe stepped forward and aligned himself behind the kneeling prince. The Duke raised his hand to silence the crowd for a final time. He addressed Hans.
You may speak your final words. Prince Hans, make your peace,
the Duke said, hoping the crowd wouldn't notice the disdain he held for the young prince. Hans looked up from the floor and stared into the sea of people who were now waiting for his death. He took in a deep breath and cleared his throat.
People of Wesselton,
Hans called out.
You all know me by my reputation, and though you might not believe this, it's one that I'm not proud of. I've done things in the name of fame, riches, and power, but most of all, I did them for approval. Approval from a man and a family who all but cast me aside from the moment I was born.
The crowd's chanting slowly dwindled to a hush as everyone was entranced in what Hans had to say.
I make no excuses for what I've done in my past. All I wish is to offer my thanks.
Hans' eyes welled up as he continued.
I've been a prisoner my entire life. Even my home felt like I was living in a cell. But there was one place in prison that ended up feeling like a home to me. The kingdom of Arendelle is a wonderful place, and the queens who watch over it are truly special. And when you're around someone who truly loves her people and her kingdom, you will learn to smell a rat of a lord when you see one.
Hans stared at the Duke.
Duke of Wesselton, I give you my life today so that you may spare my friends. On your word, you will spare Kristoff.
Hans pointed with his head toward the unconscious man on the platform.
As well as Queen Anna.
The crowd began making noise again as many wondered if they heard Hans correctly. Hans looked back toward the crowd.
Queen Anna of Arendelle is being held captive by the Duke, and all I ask is that you hold him accountable.
Hans smiled at the people of Wesselton as a tear rolled down his face.
Thank you for hearing my words. And Queen Elsa, if you can hear me, thank you for giving me a second life. Please look after my brother.
Hans closed his eyes and lowered his head, exposing the back of his neck as he knelt before the executioner. The Duke's eyes grew wide and he wore a sinister smile as he sat at the edge of his seat. His hatred for Hans had caused him to drown out the prince's speech. He looked over to the executioner, patiently waiting for the signal to proceed. The sinister grin turned into a wicked glare as the Duke turned his attention back to Hans. The Duke prepared to lift his right hand and signaled for the executioner to bring his axe down, when out of nowhere, the crowd erupted. Men, women, and children alike looked around for the source of the chaos when out of the crowd came a single loud cry. "Ships! Ships on the horizon!" Lars and Elsa looked at each other and smiled as they realized that the Arendelle fleet had arrived, just as Officer Anders and Ingrid had promised. "They fly the flag of Arendelle!" one man yelled from the crowd. The Duke's face was red with anger.
"I will not let you slip through my hands again, boy."
He raised his hand, signaling for the executioner to go through with the killing. The hooded man looked at the Duke and then back down toward Hans as he slowly lifted the large two-handed axe above his head. "Rest now," he said to Hans. He let the weight of the massive axe carry itself down toward the back of Hans' neck. The young prince thought his life was surely over when he heard a loud clinking noise, like a rock had hit something metal. He opened his eyes and lifted his head toward the executioner, who was no longer holding the axe. A second later, Hans heard the noise of the heavy weapon hitting the ground behind him. The prince followed the executioner's gaze out into the crowd where he saw Queen Elsa. All eyes were on her. Hans could see the unmistakable ice mist forming around her. The crowd was in shock at the sight of the Ice Queen. Elsa used that to her advantage as she wielded her icy powers to create a large pillar underneath her that rose high above the crowd.
"People of Wesselton," she called from her pedestal. "I am Queen Elsa of Arendelle. Your Duke, the man you trusted, has ruined your once great city, and now he's taken my sister, Queen Anna of Arendelle, hostage in his castle."
The crowd let out a series of gasps and murmurs as Elsa continued to speak.
"The man that your Duke wished to execute today is the future king of Arendelle,"
she said, referring to Kristoff.
"And this brave man who stepped in to give his life for my future brother-in-law is my most trusted regent."
Elsa pointed to Hans. A large explosion occurred in the sky above the Arendelle ships in the sea, and Elsa turned her attention directly to the Duke.
"Do you see that, Duke? That's a signal, and if I send one back, my entire army will not hesitate to storm Wesselton to save my sister."
She paused.
"So, what do you have me do? Should I send the signal for my men to come in by force? Or do we have some things to discuss?"
Elsa asked with a calm, chilling tone to her voice.